Scotland, central parts of England, for example, where we get some shelter from the breeze. But a bright start in these places, actually a better chance tomorrow of some sunshine coming through, particularly western Scotland, northwest England into the Midlands and eventually eastern parts of England as well. Some sunshine early on as well for Wales and western parts of England as well as Northern Ireland, but later the cloud thickens. We'll see further showery rain push in here. But all in all, the winds are lighter tomorrow and it's going to feel a little less unpleasant because it's going to be less unsettled. Into Friday, the outbreaks of rain that move in from the west cross the country, followed by showers. There'll be some sunshine in between, but by Saturday, further wind, rain and cloud.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
A very good morning. Welcome to the briefing here on GB News at 9 a.m. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and there really is only one story in town today. What precisely happened in Downing Street last year after that leaked video appeared to show members of staff laughing about a joke at Christmas party? How do you feel about it this morning? Big questions for the Prime Minister about what precisely went on. The police apparently re-investigating what may well have gone on. That and so much more. We want your views. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be discussing this big political story ahead of Prime Minister's Question Time in the next 30 minutes. But first, at 9, here's the news with Paul Watkins. Yeah, thanks, Darren. And that is our top story this morning. The Prime Minister facing questions in the Commons later over that leaked video showing Downing Street staff joking about an alleged Christmas party during lockdown last year. A video leaked to ITV News shows Boris Johnson's former press secretary, Allegra Stratton, answering questions from Downing Street staff pretending to be journalists 4 days after the alleged party happened, while the country was under lockdown restrictions.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas party?
What's the answer?
I don't know. I didn't.
Wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not. Is cheese and wine all right? No. It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
This is recorded. His fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
Downing Street still says there was no party, but Labour's Sir Keir Starmer is calling on the PM to come clean and apologise. The Met Police are looking into it as well. Former Downing Street advisor Sean Worth says Boris Johnson needs to explain what happened.
The Prime Minister himself I would say, just needs to issue an apology, clarifying the nature of the thing. I'm not suggesting lying, but I certainly would say there was a gathering. Yes, there was wine. We were having a sort of end of year wash up of business, but it was not a predominantly social gathering. It was a business one.
Elsewhere this morning, one of the UK's top COVID advisors has warned another nationwide lockdown cannot be ruled out. Professor Neil Ferguson says the Omicron variant is concerning, but it's not fully known what its impact will be. He suggested people may be told to work from home with the new variant set to take over from the Delta strain before Christmas. From today, if you're over 40 in England, you can now book your COVID booster jab. An extra 7 million people are now eligible for the third jab. It's exactly a year ago to the day that the first coronavirus vaccine was given in the UK. Official figures show 101 extra cases of the Omicron variant in the UK, with the total now reaching 437. Dozens of flood warnings have been issued across the UK as Storm Barra moves across the country. A yellow weather warning for wind is in place across the west coast of Wales and southwest England until 6 p.m. Meanwhile, more ice, wind and rain is expected elsewhere. The Met Office says Barra shouldn't cause as much chaos as Storm Arwen. Boris Johnson and other Western leaders say they will work together to encourage Russia to back down over what they are calling threatening behaviour towards Ukraine. Their talks follow a meeting between the US and Russian presidents in which Joe Biden warned Vladimir Putin of severe sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine. An estimated 100,000 Russian troops are now gathered on the Ukrainian border. Australia joining the US in a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics over human rights concerns. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the decision should come as no surprise after breakdowns in the nation's relationship with China in recent years. He says the boycott is in the national interest and is the right thing to do. Despite the boycott, Australian athletes will still be able to compete in the Games. And England have got off to a terrible start on day one of the first Ashes test against Australia in Brisbane. Despite winning the toss and deciding to bat, they were bowled out for just 147. Opener Rory Burns was bowled with the first ball of the match. Captain Joe Root also made naught, whilst Ben Stokes scored only 5. Australia are yet to bat because the rest of the first day's play was called off because of rain. You're up to date with the latest. We'll have more for you in half an hour.
A very good morning. Welcome to the briefing today. As I say, there is only one story in town. They're laughing at you and I and everyone else. That's the allegation against Downing Street staff this morning after that leaked video appeared to show them talking about a Christmas party that was held in Downing Street that was frankly not allowed under the rules as were in place last year. The police now re-investigating all this, and this at a time in which Downing Street have repeatedly suggested a party was not held and the rules were obeyed. This morning, Saeed Abbasi, a former chairman of the Conservative Party, saying that every minister, parliamentarian and staffer at that Downing Street party must now resign. No ifs, no buts. The rule of law is a fundamental value, the glue that holds us together. Sir Roger Gales, a Conservative MP, is saying that the Number 10 party has all the hallmarks of another Barnard Castle moment. Number 10 has some serious questions to answer and fast. Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to face a grilling today in the Commons on this. Of course, we've got Prime Minister's question time at noon, and it comes after that leaked video shows the Press Secretary, Allegra Stratton, joking about holding a Christmas party in Number 10 just 4 days after the event supposedly took place. Press room staff are seen asking her mock questions during a rehearsal for a TV briefing. Let's have a look.
I've just seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise those reports?
I went home. Hold on.
Would the Prime Minister condone having a Christmas party?
What's the answer?
I don't know.
It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not.
Is cheese and wine all right?
No.
It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
This is recorded. This fictional party was a business meeting. and it was not socially distanced.
On the day that video was recorded, 600 people, over 600 people died of coronavirus in the UK. On the day the party took place, over 500 people in this country died of coronavirus. Robert Halfon, another Conservative MP, chair of the Education Select Committee, who were marred in their own scandal this morning, says that I'm sure that those involved in the video will apologise and the Prime Minister will set out exactly what happened. I feel seriously upset. Well, the footage is being reviewed by the Met Police. Downing Street staff are alleged to have thrown that boozy party on December 18th last year, with reports saying that 40 to 50 people were in attendance. And that's despite, of course, London being in Tier 3 restrictions, which forbid households mixing indoors at the time. So Keir Starmer has called on the Prime Minister to come clean and apologise for what he claimed was shameful lies and jokes ahead of what promises to be an absolutely fascinating, crucial political moment for the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Question Times at 12 noon today. Well, let's speak to GB News presenter Arlene Foster, who, of course, also former First Minister of Northern Ireland. Good morning to you, Arlene. Just your initial thoughts this morning. I'm not sure there's many people across the country who cannot watch that video and feel pretty angry, upset, frankly.
Yeah, and I think everybody is right to feel that way. At the time, we were told that we couldn't mix together. You'll remember that I think it was very close to that time when the Prime Minister said that we should very much limit our Christmases and to not have Christmases together with other members of our families. So it was a very difficult time, and I think that's why you're seeing such anger and people saying you cannot have one rule for those who make the rules and one rule for everybody else. But of course, as you well know, Darren, we had our Christmas party moment in Northern Ireland last June when the Deputy First Minister here in Northern Ireland went to a very large funeral of a former IRA man. And at the same time was telling people not to go to funerals and to limit the number of people at funerals, but it was okay for her to go to a very large funeral. And that caused a huge difficulty here in Northern Ireland. Obviously, it caused a whole political row. But secondly, up until then, people were very compliant and were abiding by rules and regulations that were being given out by myself and the Deputy First Minister as First Minister and Deputy First Minister. But after that, we seen that the rules were not complied with, and actually there was a real problem with credibility. And I think that is the biggest problem for the Prime Minister now, that if he decides, because of Omicron, because of COVID, to make further restrictions, then I think there is going to be a huge problem in relation to compliance.
And in many ways, Arlene, this has been compared, isn't it, to that Barnard Castle moment also with Dominic Cummings last year, which did damage the government's credibility to a large degree in the public's mind. Many suggesting in some ways this is worse than Barnard Castle because it happened after all that controversy when people really should have known better.
Well, it's the old line, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. And really, what the Prime Minister will have to deal with today and what he should be concerned about is not the noises coming from the opposition or indeed from the media. He should be concerned about what's happening within the Conservative Party, because if his MPs lose faith in his leadership, then that, of course, is the critical moment for him. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what's happening today. I note that ministers were not doing the round of the studios this morning. I think that's something that is concerning, but perhaps people are just waiting to hear what the Prime Minister has to say in relation to his explanation. And there needs to be a very full explanation because this video is very, very damaging.
How crucial do you think, I mean, you've been in this position, leader of a party. It's not always easy, frankly, and, particularly when you're a top politician. And we don't know whether Boris Johnson himself attended that party. There are suggestions he wasn't there. Actually, these were junior members of staff. And thus, actually, maybe his initial approach was to try and protect those members of staff. But in the end, what we hear from Conservative MPs and from others is that lack of leadership, or that he should have known where this was leading to. And that's why PMQs will be a crucial moment for him today, won't it?
PMQs will be absolutely critical today. It'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer deals with this. This is not a moment for frivolity. This is a moment for getting answers. And I think Boris needs to be very clear. If he wasn't at that party, then he needs to be very clear about that. If he was at the party, of course, that presents him with more difficulties. If these are people who are holding quite high jobs and he's trying to protect them, well, I'm sorry, some of these people are going to have to resign. And I think that's what's going to have to come today. There is going to have to be some acknowledgement that there has been wrongdoing in the heart of government, and there has to be accountability for it.
And just very finally, Ollie, while we've got you, we must talk about this variant. You're right in saying that the latest news isn't necessarily great, that it may well be doubling in the UK, the Omicron variant, every 2 to 3 days, that it could become the dominant variant, not in the new year, but even before Christmas. Talk about potentially reimposing restrictions like working from home here in England. What's the situation like there in Northern Ireland? Because we know the first cases of the new variant were discovered there yesterday, I think. Do you think further restrictions might have to come into place in Northern Ireland?
Well, you're right to say that Omicron has now been detected in Northern Ireland, 2 cases in Belfast and 1 in the Southeastern Trust just yesterday have been detected. The Chief Medical Officer was speaking last night and this morning. He's essentially saying, look, this is not good news. However, we should not panic. We should wait and see what the evidence is in relation to how serious the Omicron variant is. We're waiting to hear evidence as to, we think it's more transmissible than the Delta variant, but it's not. There's no evidence as yet that it's more serious. So he's saying not to panic. Actually, our hospital admissions, they were running at 15% on COVID admissions in November. That has fallen to 10%, so that is good news. So I know that the medical people here will be watching those hospital admissions very carefully now that Omicron is in Northern Ireland.
Ollie, as always, really appreciate your thoughts this morning, and we'll see you here in this very chair on, not that one, this one that I'm sat on Friday. We're moving around the studio. She's going to be sat here Friday at 3 o'clock. Well, as I say, we want to hear your views on this story. I'm sure you've got some pretty strong ones. Maybe you don't think this is as much of a story as it is being portrayed. Maybe you are pretty angry and upset. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews, and we'll read your thoughts a little later on in the programme. Let's have a look at the papers this morning, though, unsurprisingly dominating many of the front pages. The Mail is calling it a sick joke, accusing the Prime Minister's spokeswoman of laughing about what the paper calls an illegal party at number 10 whilst the nation was in lockdown. The Daily Mirror newspaper has also got some other damaging revelations for the government, which accuses the ex-Education Secretary Gavin Williamson of also throwing a party last Christmas while London was in Tier 2, meaning no social mixing between households. The former Cabinet Minister allegedly hosted up to 24 staff in the Department for Education cafe for drinks and canapes on the 10th of December. According to one source, told the paper it was just so reckless. Number 10, party clown, says the Metro. It reports on that ITV News exclusive video which shows senior Downing Street staff appearing to joke about the Christmas party 4 days after the alleged event. And the other main talking point in the papers is the potential reintroduction, as we've just been talking about, of further restrictions in England, including potentially COVID passports and working from home. That's what the Telegraph goes with. Officials have been working on the economic impact of urging people to stay at home, but the move is said to have split the cabinet that met yesterday. And the Eyes headline, it's beginning to look a lot like last Christmas. They claim that Boris Johnson is refusing to rule out asking people in England to work from home, as 80,000 daily cases of Omicron are predicted by Christmas. Well, the opposition have unsurprisingly made quite a lot of hay on this story this morning, but can Keir Starmer punch through? What is the mood in at the Labour Party and indeed amongst the public? Well, delighted to say I'm joined by political commentator and former editor of a Labour list, Peter Edwards. Very good morning to you, Peter. Keir Starmer was pretty quick out of the blocks yesterday on the TV stations and social media, saying the Prime Minister must come clean. It's going to be a crucial moment for Boris Johnson at PMQs. It's also going to be a real test and a crucial moment for Keir Starmer too.
Yeah, I think it'll be excruciating for Boris Johnson. I expect him to stick, to this very awkward line of saying, well, all the rules were followed, but not really explaining how or when or by whom. But I think you're right in your intro. Of course, the mood in the Labour Party is important, but the mood in the public, among the public, is far more important. And for me, this is a Barnard Castle moment. This has a cut through already. It's on Facebook. People who don't follow politics particularly are talking about it. It's on the front page of newspapers, it's in the pubs. For all the same reasons as we're already familiar with, that the British people made so many sacrifices throughout all the lockdowns, and there appears to be people right at the top of the country wielding huge power, ignoring the rules, and in effect sticking two fingers up at the rest of us.
In saying that, we know that Boris Johnson has been accused of a lot of things in the past. The public, in some ways, are either sympathetic to him, understanding. Some feel that actually many of these potential mistakes are built into to his reputation as a politician. That frankly, some people quite like him because he's not, the kind of typical politician you see time and time again. And in many ways, some of his critics fear that simply these stories don't stick when it comes to Boris Johnson.
Well, there is a Teflon element to him, but not in a good way. And we have to remember we're talking about different things. So for 10, 20 years, Boris Johnson has been in the public eye. He's one of the people that is often called a liar, which is a word that journalists would not normally use about anyone, for fear of libeling them. But we know Boris Johnson was sacked from the Times, and he was sacked from the front bench by Michael Howard about 15 years ago. So, but these are, if you like, very serious matters, but they're about his personal integrity. Now, in lockdown and the alleged party, we're in different territory. And if you're a voter, perhaps outside London, and you lost a loved one to coronavirus and you weren't able to hold their hand or say goodbye properly, we know that applies to thousands of people, sadly, then I think this is really going to sting far more than just an apparently private matter about Boris Johnson's personal life, for example.
Just very finally, Peter, you're a seasoned political commentator. You've seen many of these things before. Lots of suggestions this morning that this is a moment for Boris Johnson, a very precarious one in terms of his premiership. Some suggesting it may well precede the end of it. I think Dominic Cummings has just tweeted #regime change. Are we at that point, really?
Well, it's certainly a moment, and just to explain briefly what we all mean by that, I mean, it's one of those things that everyone remembers, whether it's John Prescott punching an elector on the first day of election campaign, which was a mistake and he apologised for, or something much more serious like a breach of lockdown rules. But it's one of those things that will stay in the public mind for years, if not decades afterwards. And it stings so much because of their hypocrisy and because of suffering people around the country. In terms of Boris Johnson, he's raced through all these phases since December 2019 when he won the election here. There was hardly any honeymoon period, but there was one. Then there was the onset of a national crisis, support for the government, then support ebbed away, and then a lot of concern over competence. And now finally, what seems like the death throes of a regime with apparent corruption and being out of touch. You remember the fiasco over Owen Paterson. But no one should think Boris Johnson's going to go this week or this month. But I think his leadership is now in terminal decline.
Peter, appreciate your thoughts this morning. Peter Edwards there. I'll let you answer that phone. Someone clearly trying to get in touch with Peter, who is former editor of Labour List. Well, as we say, we wanted you to get in touch with us this morning at gbviews at gbnews.uk or at gbnews, trying to gauge what the public mood is. Not looking good, it must be said, for the Prime Minister. Looking at the emails we've received this morning, Sharon says Boris wasn't there. It's a year too late. Just looks like a nasty smear tactics to her. But Gillian says this goes to show how this is one big con, because these people do not think there is no seriousness to infection. Nothing will be done. Rules for them, rules for us. Anon, though, says that this is a waste of time. The woman said it was a business meeting, but the mock interview was just a laugh among colleagues. There are more important things for Parliament to discuss and the police to investigate. Graham has emailed, though, saying the Queen sat on her own at her husband's funeral. She should sack all of them that were at the party. And Martin says the government's problem is quite simply hypocrisy. There never should have been a mandatory lockdown, and they should have recognised it was unenforceable. Unenforceable laws or worse than no laws at all. Always get in touch. We want to reflect a cross range of views here on GB News. The email address there just at the bottom of your screen. Well, we've been getting the view, of course, from Northern Ireland and indeed from England this morning about the potential of further restrictions here. But what's the situation in the rest of Ireland? Because strict new limits actually on hospitality and on home visits have been announced by the country's Prime Minister. From the 7th of December until January 9th, nightclubs will close and restaurants and bars will only be allowed to run table service with a maximum of 6 people per booking. All sounds terribly familiar, doesn't it? Indoor events such as concerts must operate at 50% capacity, while people should only have visitors from a maximum of 3 other households in their home over Christmas. Well, Kevin Meagher is a commentator on British and Irish politics and a former Labour advisor, and he joins me now. Very good morning to you, Kevin. I say this all sounds terribly familiar. Here we are again, big restrictions in Ireland over Christmas.
There are. It's another kind of diluted Christmas by the looks of it again. The Irish government just very conscious that it's seen a rise in COVID cases pretty much every day since mid-October, and on the trends that it's got, and it's going to have an effect on their healthcare system, which is already starting to feel the strain. So I think the government's tried to ride out and meet the COVID surge head on. And is trying to basically price in that it's going to have difficulties dealing with it, perhaps through Christmas and after Christmas. So if it can knock the edges off it by bringing in some of these restrictions, which are all too familiar really to the Irish people, they've gone through this for the last couple of years. There'll be enormous groans, particularly in the hospitality sector, as you say. Some quite draconian restrictions there. Venues can only have 50% capacity and the like. So lots of problems in the Irish hospitality sector are built into the system. But again, it all goes back to the question of rising cases and potential effects on a healthcare system that's already feeling the strain. So I think that's the context to it.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary, isn't it? I think Dublin as a city has had longer lockdowns than any other city in the world. I think bar Melbourne, which is quite extraordinary, what most Irish people have been through in the last couple of years. Now, largely, I think that is due to a not great healthcare system, but we have to remember these restrictions are coming in at a time before even the Omicron variant has started to properly seed itself in Ireland, so cases could rise even more.
And I think that's, as I say, I think that's very much the context that the Irish government's working in. Leo Varadkar, the Deputy Prime Minister, is himself a medical doctor, so I'm sure he's having quite a big say over the direction of policy. I think broadly, although Irish people will be going, here we go again, and it's another dismal Christmas, and hospitality is badly affected. I mean, there does seem to be a general acceptance from most people that actually something has to happen to try and, as I say, knock the edges off the surge that they're seeing. That said, there's been some pretty sizable backlashes from people that have kind of had enough, both, I think, in the principle in terms of locking down again, and some pretty draconian restrictions, as you were saying, that have been affecting Dublin for a very long time. But also because a lot of businesses are really starting to feel the pinch, and the ones that have managed to survive the earlier lockdowns are looking ahead and thinking, if we don't get a reasonable Christmas, then is my business going to survive going into the new year? Now, whatever Ireland's going through, that's a pretty similar story, I guess, to most of mainland Europe and indeed Northern Ireland too, as well, which has got a similar kind of profile at the moment. But I think the hope in Dublin is that if they take some early measures and keep the public with them as they do that they may be able to sort of ride the curve going into January, February, when otherwise they're looking at quite a big spike.
Kevin, really appreciate your thoughts. Kevin Marr there joining us with the latest of what's happening in Ireland. Of course, crucial moment for the hospitality industry in the run-up to Christmas with those new restrictions come into place. Just some other political news, actually, in the last couple of minutes, and that is that Germany now has officially a new Chancellor, with Olaf Scholz being elected by the German Parliament to replace Angela Merkel. End of an era there in Germany. Angela Merkel, the third longest serving Chancellor, 16 odd years. She is now stepping down today. Olaf Scholz is now the new German Chancellor. Staying with foreign affairs, the United States President Joe Biden spoke with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin yesterday, warning the West would impose serious sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine. The leader spoke for 2 hours on the recent military build-up along the border with Ukraine. Biden believes Putin is seeking to invade the country, but the Kremlin says it is NATO who's looking to conquer Ukraine. They insist that the troops there are for defensive purposes only. Well, let's speak to Keir Giles. He's the Senior Consulting Fellow with the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. A very good morning to you, Giles. What do we take away from that phone call yesterday?
Well, it seems there's good news and there's bad news. On the one hand, President Biden does seem to have lived up to his promise to actually lay down the line and say to Russia, no, you don't have the right to dictate how other countries guide their future and who they are friends with. On the other hand, it doesn't look as though that message has sunk in, because if you read back what the Kremlin is saying about that conversation, then it's exactly as you just said. They're still talking about NATO making, as they put it, dangerous attempts to seize Ukrainian territory. So you still have that basic misunderstanding of what NATO is, how it works, and the fact that actually countries want to join NATO precisely for protection from the kind of thing that Russia is doing at the moment. So there's this huge mismatch of understanding of how countries work. Basically, Russia thinks that NATO is like the Warsaw Pact, and let's not forget that's also a defensive alliance, but one that kept invading itself. So we're still a long way apart in terms of how both countries understand both the future of Ukraine, the nature of the state, and actually how international relations work overall.
Oh, I think we may well have. Oh, I think we have lost him. Keir, I should say, Keir Giles there from Chatham House. Unfortunately, the line has gone down. As I say, we've been talking about this big story today, of course, about that leaked tape, about potential rule-breaking inside Downing Street. We always want your views. We want to gauge public opinion on this. GBviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBnews. But that is it for the briefing for this morning. You will not want to miss, I can tell you, Prime Minister's Question Time at 12 noon today. Gloria has got that for you. I'll be back with post-reaction at 3 o'clock with the briefing, and we'll be with you throughout the day, bringing you the very latest updates. This is going to be a very busy political day. We'll have all the details here on GB News. But for now, from me, it's goodbye. Let's get the news at 9:30 on the dot. Here's Paul Hawkins.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Our top stories then at 9:30. The Prime Minister facing questions in the Commons later over that video leaked to ITV News showing Downing Street staff joking about an alleged Christmas party during lockdown last year. The video shows Boris Johnson's former Press Secretary Allegra Stratton answering questions during a mock briefing 4 days after the alleged party happened, whilst the country was under lockdown restrictions. Downing Street maintains there was no party. One of the UK's top COVID advisors, meanwhile, has warned another nationwide lockdown cannot be ruled out. Professor Neil Ferguson says the Omicron variant is concerning, but it isn't fully known what its impact will be. From today, if you're over 40 years old, you can now book your COVID booster jab 3 months after receiving your second dose of the vaccine. It follows official figures showing 101 additional cases of the Omicron variant in the UK, with the total now reaching 437. Dozens of flood warnings have been issued across the UK as Storm Barra continues to move across the country. Meanwhile, more ice, wind and rain is expected elsewhere. A yellow weather warning for wind is in place across the west coast of Wales and southwest England until 6 p.m. And England have got off to a shocking start on day one of the first Ashes test in Brisbane. Despite winning the toss and deciding to bat, they were bowled out by Australia for just 147. Australia are yet to bat because the rest of the first day's play was called off because of rain. Those are your top stories for now. We'll have more on all those stories at 10.
It's time to remind ourselves